the stream's catching, so we don't lose. One time we were recording and we lost like the first minute and a half because we just went straight into it. And so I think it was either Phil or I, one of the two, had to record like a separate intro just to make it make sense for the pod.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned our lesson.
Now, when you guys are watching for questions, do you have the YouTube stream up? Do you have I don't know which all platforms you guys stream this to.
So we stream it in Restream, and there is in Restream, there's a chat that collates everything from
everything. Oh, that's nice.
YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So
cool.
It's pretty sweet. And if I recall, it shows the little icon of like where it's coming from. It's pretty cool.
I always wondered because it would be because of the delay or the lag. It would be kind of weird to have watch yourself talk about something that you just
I would
30 seconds ago or
I would get all kinds of distracted. It would never work. All right, ready to do this?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Welcome in, everyone, to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, here with a festive Flyover Footy edition for you. It is our final show of 2023, and we've got a special one for you. I'm not joined by Phil. I'm not joined by Santi, not Stu. They've taken the week off. I think they've taken the rest of the year off. But I'm joined by Chris Gebhart from STL Soccer News. I'm so excited to be joined by you. Chris, how's it going? Why don't you introduce yourself and what you do with St. Louis Soccer News?
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a poor replacement for Santi and Phil and Stu and those guys. So, but I'm super excited to get a chance to talk to you and talk soccer, which I love to do. Just a little bit of what I do for the website is basically it's just it started off as a way for myself to follow guys like you and what you guys do is, when the team was getting ready to get started, one of the things that I was interested in finding out was, hey, there has to be all this content out there. And I knew about Flyover, obviously, and some of the other podcasts and people who were creating content online. And it just it was difficult to find everything. And I wanted to kind of, I'm a content junkie. So I wanted to find everything. And at a certain point I said, well, if I'm having this much trouble finding everything, then there's got to be other people who are having the same issue, and being able to find everything that they want to kind of absorb from all these different opinions and people who are putting stuff out there. So I just started a really simple website and said, hey, I'm just going to throw everything on there. And if, somebody else finds it useful, great. And then I had a flood of people saying, well, if you're throwing that on there, why don't you do this? Or why don't you add that to it? And it's just kind of snowballed since then. And now, it's just, kind of a central point where if people are looking for something and they can't find it, or they just want a central place to kind of go, there's all kinds of different links all the way down to high school stuff and the local, non-pro and semi-pro teams and the college stuff. And so not really doing any original content. And I'll leave that to the experts like you and the other guys are doing that stuff. But I just wanted to make it easier for you guys to get views and eyes on your content. So, and so much appreciated to the people who actually do the hard work of creating these podcasts and that stuff, which is great. I'm a fan just like anybody else. So, that's what the website really is for. It's just for us fans to be able to find you guys more easily. So.
And we absolutely adore it. Honestly, we talk about it all the time in our group chat. It's got just an easy to use, simple interface on it. STLsoccernews.com. You can follow them on socials, STL_soccer_news. And you do that. You collate everything, putting everything into like a centralized location with easy to see tabs for the club, for fans, podcasts, the community, college and prep. It's an easy one-stop shop to stay caught up in just about everything. And it's kind of an indispensable resource, I think, or at least it's become one as this club has grown into not just an amazing club on the field, but I think we hear about the fans, we hear about the atmosphere, we hear about the social media engagements all over the place. And it's amazing to have this kind of thing. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, well, yeah, no problem. I mean, thank you guys in return, obviously, for the people who are actually doing the like I said, the hard work of writing articles and putting podcasts together and streaming and all the stuff that, really makes this club special from a fan perspective. We've had the Cardinals forever. We've had the Blues for a very, very long time. This is a different feeling around this club, and it's really ours as a community. And to be able to contribute or give something back is has been great for me, and just to be able to help highlight the people who are doing this kind of stuff, and helping get eyes on content, and we the schedules and all that stuff. If it helps somebody who interested in going to a college game or a high school game, or any of that kind of stuff, the more that we can keep people involved or get new people involved in soccer in the St. Louis community is just going to make it even stronger. And one of the things I wanted to make a real quick mention of is, I've had people who have complimented me, and it's very nice, and I very much appreciate it. But the original person who did this is no longer with us, is Steve Olson.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a 100th of what he ever was. Like, he was the kind of the godfather of this kind of thing of collating and being at every event and all that stuff. So unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but he was really the one who started this kind of thing. And then unfortunately, since he's not around anymore, I said, well, maybe I can do something, but I will never even approach his level of contribution to the St. Louis soccer community. So much love to him, to Steve Olson. So
you've picked up the baton well and continue the tradition, and I think it's something to be proud of, to see that type of content carried forward, and it kind of gives us all a nice platform to help get familiar with everybody, and kind of collaborate with everybody else. So it's fun as a creator to see that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I like highlighting people like Dave Lang and St. Louis Soccer Tracker, Mr. Simpson, like all the people who are putting their stuff out there, and it's great to be able to highlight those guys. They're, you guys, the podcast people, the people on X or Facebook, they're the ones who I want to get the attention, because you're doing the work. And so if I can help with that in any way, that's what I try to do. So
the wind beneath our wings, right, Chris?
I won't break into song, so hopefully you won't either. So
well, then we better pivot over to some news, because
sure. Yeah.
There has been some news. It feels like it's been forever since we've done a flyover, but 2 weeks, I guess, is what the off season is for. It's our last show of 2023. We think, unless something amazing or something unbelievable would happen, this is what we're planning for. And we're going to recap everything that's gone on in the past couple of weeks. Unfortunately, we've had a little bit of a longer offseason than we wanted, but St. Louis made a quick announcement early into their offseason that Kyle Hiebert had been signed to a new deal. This one took us a little bit by surprise. It wasn't anything that we were really expecting, but I think it was polarizing in a certain way, because Kyle Hiebert tends to draw that reaction. But the deal itself, City signed Kyle Hiebert to a new contract running through 2026 with a club option for 2027. Hiebert's been with St. Louis, obviously, since he signed a contract with City 2 in 2022. In MLS regular season play, Kyle started 24 matches, 10 at center back, 13 at left back, and once at right back. He's got 2 goals in his career, and City has been 15, 7, and 2 during MLS regular season play when Kyle's been in the starting 11. For country, Hiebert's made his first appearance with the Canadian men's national team senior camp in March for the CONCACAF Nations League matches. Prior to that call-up, he made 3 appearances for the U18 Canadian men's national team. So we've got a club and country guy locked in through at least 2026. What was your first thought, Chris, as you saw this extension?
It made perfect sense to me. I think from a on-field perspective, he's the kind of guy that, yes, he is a center back who was forced into the left back position basically out of necessity. And hopefully, if he is going to play more there, or continue to play there, he will continue to grow and develop his skills as a left back. I don't know if that's the plan, but if it is, then he's the perfect kind of guy that gives you that flexibility of, hey, Parker needs a rest, or Nielsen needs a rest, or, whoever, or there's an injury, and to have a little bit of flexibility on that back line, I think is really nice. And to be able to say, like, okay, Marcanic is out, or Hiebert's going to start for him, or he's going to start at center back. So I think it makes sense from a flexibility perspective. And it made sense to me, rather than to just say, okay, we're not going to re-sign Hiebert, and we're just going to go out and get a guy who can only play center back, or who can only play left back. It's almost like getting 2 depth pieces out of 1 slot. So that's what I thought about it. So,
One of the big feedback I saw, some of the comments related to the depth piece, the fact that a lot of people see Kyle Hiebert as good depth to an MLS side that needs that depth the more matches they're playing. We've seen what can happen last year when you're lacking depth in a certain position, and I point to a left back or a center midfield where you're having to pull players from other positions to try and fill gaps for extended portions of the season. This really does hit that, and you're spot on. Left back, center back, he was put in a position at left back where he's never played before. He was very open and honest about that. He took it from that first game against Sporting KC and he ran with it. He was our left back for a majority of the season. And I see the success that he had in that, but I also see the dedication and commitment to the system. He's definitely grown to be a Carnell guy, in my opinion. Just like we saw Jared Stroud as that kind of a player where he's in the lineup. He's proving himself in practice. There's a reason he's out there. He's got the flexibility of the center back, left back. He does what he needs to do. And it's interesting to look at this deal, new contract through 2026, possibly 27, and you compare it to some of the other players on our back line because you're seeing a little bit of a coming into focus over the next few years, in addition to the goalkeeper position, I think, which we'll get to in a minute. But I just want to throw some numbers out there in kind of context for Kyle Hiebert. Looking at our current center back and our current left back situation, Hiebert signed through 26, option for 27. Tim Parker is currently signed through 2024 with an option for 25. Joachim Nilsson is signed through 2026. We don't know if there's an option associated to that, but most MLS contracts contain options. So Parker through 24, possible option for 25. Nilsson signed through 26. Josh Yaro, his option was just picked up for 2024. Anthony Markanic is signed through 2024 with a possible 25 option. So you're looking at guys who this year, 2024, you could be seeing the end of the line for greater than 50% of our back line. And then you have Joachim Nilsson through 26, Hiebert through 26. Whether you call it a depth piece or a center back of the future, I think you're seeing that there's consistency and continuity being set up by Lutz and Carnell with some of these players.
Yeah, you as a sporting director, GM, whatever sport it is, you have two eyes, and you have to have an eye on what's happening this season, and then you got to be looking down the road. You always have to be planning, what's next. And so what you don't want to wind up is a situation where you feel like you're forced to sign somebody or to re-sign them or to keep pick up an option because you don't have any better solution or you don't have any depth behind them or nobody coming up to push them for that spot. You don't want to be in a position where you're like, well, it's either this guy or nothing. And so, I think that especially when you talk about it, I'm sure we'll touch on it tonight, just the amount of games, you need bodies and you need people who can play at this level. And my hope is that, again, if Hiebert is asked to play at the left back position or the center back position, during the year, which I'm sure he'll play both. I don't see, unless they go out and get somebody at the left back, I imagine that Hiebert will still play there, that he just continues to grow and get better at that spot. And next year, beyond, not this coming year, but the year after that, when you talk 2025, you're liable to see some turnover. And having a guy already locked in that kind of what he is and what he can be, I think is nothing but a positive. So.
And I agree with what you said there about the left back too, because any additional move that we make is going to give a huge indication as to what the immediate plans for Kyle Hiebert are. If we sign a left back, then you could see Hiebert more slotting in as depth to center back, and you could see him, you could forecast him in like a Champions Cup, a US Open Cup, and then spot start here and there because we still don't know the full health of Joachim Nilsson, his ability to go 90 consistently. It's unproven in a City kit so far. But if we sign an additional center back, whether it's an immediate depth or even somebody to push Nilsson or Parker, then you could see Hiebert being slotted in more as that everyday starting left back. Because also, you remember back to when Anthony Markanic was signed and Lutz's comments of he was signed to be depth. He was signed to be a backup, and he kind of just took the ball and ran with it. So you don't necessarily want to count on Markanic yet. You hope that he's going to progress at that level. Yeah. But I think any other move that we see, we'll have to wait and see for that next move, left back or center back, to see probably where Kyle Hiebert shakes out. One thing we don't have to wait for really is our goalkeeping core. That is locked and loaded for 2024, as Christian Olivares was signed as our third goalkeeper for the 2025 season with club options until 26 and 27. It's a pretty long-term possible plan. And I really like this deal because a few reasons, Chris. We saw some success from Olivares, who started 8 matches for City 2 in their first 12. He tallied a 3-3-2 mark. He had 2 penalty kick wins and a clean sheet. Kid's only 21 years old. He was hurt for a good portion of last year, and that's kind of one of the only reasons that he didn't see more time with City 2. But the amount of time, the amount of growth that he showed, he seems like he's one of those guys, the perfect example that we've talked about on Flyover of developing the pathway to pro. He didn't come through the academy. He's a Tacoma, Washington native, but he developed well with City 2, and now he's getting that opportunity to be promoted. And his work, kind of just like you look at the contracts for the defense, you can see a possible eye to the future here where Berkey is signed through 25, Lunt is signed through 24 with a possible option. So that contract of Olivares signing through 25 with options, those options could easily be picked up if he's seen as a goalkeeper of the future. What do you think about picking up Olivares?
Well, again, I think it makes a perfect sense, especially when you think about, Luntz signed through this year, Berkey signed for 2 more years. I almost equate it to a hockey situation where you might have a guy in the minor leagues who's ready to go, but do you want to bring him up to sit him, or do you want to, get him a chance to play? And so having Olivares and signing him now, and basically, I think, all things considered, one of my things that I was saying pretty much all season consistently was Berkey plays too much. He is playing too many games. He even kind of expressed, how worn down he felt, kind of 2/3 of the way through the season with the heat and the humidity. And I think, by we talk about depth and we talked about the center back position. I think by the end of the season, Parker and Berkey were toast. I think they played too many games. And that's not a criticism of the staff, but, and that's definitely not, but I think they were just exhausted. And so Berkey needs, if they have faith in Lunt that he's the guy that can be the number 2 this year, that's going to play games, then they need to utilize him. He can't go through the whole season, play 2 games again. But if it's a situation where they're like, okay, we're gonna get Berkey his amount of games that we want to play him, and then Lunt will play some games, and then maybe get Olivares in there to get him a taste of MLS. I think that would be a positive, because chances are 2025 he might be the number 2 guy.
And the increased workload and taking what they learned from last year is going to be an interesting storyline, mainly for the goalkeeping position, but also elsewhere, just to see how much rest the club is willing to give some of these players to try and get them fresh legs later in the season. It was a very interesting dynamic to see St. Louis so hot early, and then they didn't go cold as the season progressed necessarily, but they definitely cooled off a little bit. And then when they got to the playoffs, they obviously went ice cold. But juxtapose that to a team like Sporting KC, which you have to, where they started off so dreadfully and then they picked up steam. That's something St. Louis is learning from, and they're going to take those lessons to heart. But they're almost thrust into the fire even more because of Champions Cup. And so you do wonder if Olivares, unlike Michael Creek, may see time starting for City at some point where Berkey and or Lunt are healthy scratches, and he just gets an opportunity where they have maybe an entire 2-month stretch where it's a match every 3 or 4 days. If that scenario happens, if we progress in Champions Cup to the point where we're doing Champions Cup, US Open Cup, MLS play, I definitely see Olivares as getting at least 1 or 2 starts there in that segment of games.
Yeah, I think he'd have to. I think I hate to broach this topic, but I think that there may have been some chasing of records last year. They were so close to breaking the all-time wins record. And yet it almost makes you wonder, like, were they pushing for that so hard that it hurt them later in the season, or especially late in the season, that they were trying to get these wins and trying to, basically break every record that they possibly could, and say, hey, we're going to make this as memorable a first season as possible, to the detriment of, obviously the last 4 games were not the team that we saw for the majority of the year. And so, as MLS Cup proved, you don't have to win your conference to win the cup. You don't have to win your conference to be in the cup. Neither of the 2 teams playing for it finished first in their conference. And in fact, I don't think either one of them finished second in their conference. So it's important to have home field, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. And so, especially with the current format. And so, as Kansas City showed in the first round against us. So, I definitely think that The learning from this year will help the staff. I think will help Carnell. And, I think they've identified already that, hey, we have depth. We need to rely on it. Where we don't have depth, we need to go out and get pieces. And I think we're going to lead into another guy we're about ready to talk about. That is clearly a move that they're making to add depth in a different area. So, I think the more they can, if my attitude on it is, if you have guys that are on the team that you think can play at the MLS level, then they need to play. And if they can't play, then they need to be replaced by guys who can. And, you need to trust in the team that you have.
And the next deal that we made definitely pulled in a guy with MLS experience and proven at this level. Chris Durkin comes to St. Louis at this point in our club's young history, a blockbuster trade. I think it's the biggest one we've made so far. St. Louis City SC has acquired United States Youth National Team and DC United defensive midfielder Chris Durkin for midfielder Jared Stroud, defender Lucas Bartlett, and $300,000 in 2024 general allocation money. Chris Durkin will become the first U22 initiative roster spot for St. Louis City. Durkin turns 24 in February. He played 3 years at the USL level while signing a homegrown deal with DC United at the age of 16. He was their youngest homegrown signing, and he made his MLS debut in March 2018, played a season and a half for DCU before being loaned to St. Trudens in the Belgian First Division, familiar club for anybody following St. Louis City natives or St. Louis City players who come from Europe, where Klaus found some time, so they were teammates for a bit. Durkin completed a permanent transfer to St. Trudens in May 2020. He played 3 seasons for them through March 22. Afterwards, he came back to MLS, and this is where I love his story, because his pathway back is very MLS-y. Houston Dynamo used their number 2 pick in the allocation order back in 2022 to select Durkin to bring back. DC United then reacquired him through a trade for $325,000 of GAM. They signed him to a U22 deal. It's that same U22 deal that City acquires in the trade, and it runs through 2024 with a club option for 2025. Did you catch all that, Chris? Does all that make sense?
It was funny because I've seen on X recently people saying, if you understand all this GAM TAM movement, then you're a bigger nerd than I am.
Yep.
Yes, it is probably the biggest trade we've seen so far. No offense to the $175,000 that we just gave away to Nashville. So, he'll be missed. But this trade is exactly the type of deal that we needed. Yes. So it is a very MLS-ish style trade, and Durkin's path is about as MLS as you can get with the trading of GAM, and
you've got everything.
Yeah,
you've got GAM, everything. You've got homegrowns, U22s, you've got allocation order. I mean, it checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah, short of him becoming a DP, he's got pretty much everything else. All the other boxes are checked. And if he gets a foreign green card, then we can use an international slot on him too. So, exactly.
So what do you think this does for City? Because, at face value, you're sending a midfielder, you're sending a defender, and you're getting a midfielder.
Well, I said it when it happened. Oh, go ahead, Matt. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, tell me how you think.
Okay, so when it happened, I said you're trading from depth to get a guy at the one position we had no depth at all. And so, yes, all respect to Stroud and to Bartlett, guys who will forever be part of the first season club. They will always be, part of that memorable season. I'm more, obviously excited for Bartlett to potentially maybe get more minutes than he would have seen here. I don't think he was going to have that much opportunity to play. Even with the need for, extra minutes and stuff with all the extra games. And I think Stroud, as love-hate as many people had with that particular player, it's a guy who I think as the season went on, the reason he was getting so many minutes was not because necessarily of his improved play. I think it was because Alm was hurt. I think that was the number one reason why you saw more of Stroud, is because Rasmus Alm was not available. Hoping that Alm is healthy and his hernia is taken care of and all that stuff this year. I think they look at it and say, well, we have Celio, who grew by leaps and bounds, from the player he was at the beginning of the year to the end of the year. We have a guy like Thorson, who it's going to be now his second year in the league, having got a kind of a taste of it in the back half of the first season. You have guys who can fill that role that Stroud played. So you're trading from depth there. You're trading from depth from Bartlett for the one position we had no depth at, which was center defensive midfield. All you had was Blom, which, he had kind of an up and down season. When he's great. But, obviously he had COVID, he had an illness, he had he pulled his groin. I think he had a lot of difficulties when it was really cold. I think he had a lot of difficulties when it was super hot and humid. South Africa is not that temperature. You'd think it's hot, but it's not. It's a coastal country. So I think he struggled in the heat and humidity. And when he was out of the lineup, and you could probably speak to this, it was very noticeable that we had nobody who could really replace him as a 6.
And throughout the season, we tried different things depending on who was available and how long we were without Blom. So you're talking about, at that point in time last year, we had Edu Leuven and Jabulu Blom as our double pivot if we were running a 4-2-3-1. Lutz had always described Blom as the missing piece, that the defensive mid that we needed. He's always described Edu Leuven more as an engine, a box to box. So you see his mindset for those two players. He straight up called Chris Durkin a young, talented defensive midfielder. And so in his quotes in the article, hardworking, ambitious, fighter mentality, that exact kind of player that you want as the 1B to Jabulu Blom, or the 1A, to Blom's 1B. But last year, it was needing to convert an attacking midfielder in Indiana Vassilev to play defensive midfield, a position that he's never played before. If you remember last preseason, we were talking about seeing Indiana Vassilev and AZ Jackson as our defensive midfielders in preseason because we had nobody else. We were waiting for Blom to come. That's how much pressure, how much we needed Blom in that lineup, and how much we were expecting him to carry the workload for the defensive midfield. We were converting other players already in preseason just to fill a gap until he got here. And so when he went down, we were looking at keeping Indiana Vassilev there. We were looking at thrusting Miggy Perez into action for an extended period of time, where now you've got the excitement of Perez, but you also have people saying he wasn't ready for it. And that's neither here nor there. At this point, it was he had the ability to play, and he was a great stopgap for getting us to where we needed to be. At this point, you're also having Tyson Pierce on the roster, though we don't expect him to necessarily play a huge feature role next season, and definitely not as the defensive midfielder number 6. But this midfield now, it's bolstered by the fact that, Indiana Vassilev can still play there in a pinch, but you also unlock his ability to return to the attacking mid, play more of a starring role, or at least swap on with AZ Jackson or with Nugvi Thors and Rasmus Alm, play a feature role in the attacking mid, no matter what competition you're in. It adds to the depth up there. But when you're looking at whether it's going to be a 4-4-2, a 4-2-3-1, having Durkin and Blom complement each other in a double pivot or in sub roles for each other, it gives you so much additional flexibility throughout the season. You don't need Blom to go 90 every week. You might not need Blom to even feature every single week, which just means you're going to prolong his ability to go to the end of the season. In addition to what he's learned about himself and how to handle the heat and humidity of St. Louis, there's a lot to like about being able to bolster this one position. And as good as I thought Jared Stroud was last year for large portions of the season, as good as we both know Lucas Bartlett was for at least a 2-month period of time where he was starting after Hebert moved to left back, the fact is that we are heavy in both of those spots. Heavy enough to where the loss is completely viewed as dealing from positions of strength to bolster an area of need. And that's almost straight up exactly what this is. We're going to talk about the depth chart here pretty soon, but without Stroud, you're still looking at an attacking midfield that contains Nugvi Thorson, AZ Jackson, Rasmus Alm, Celio Pompeu, Indiana Vassilev, Tomas Ostrak for 2 or 3 positions, depending on your formation. Now you're looking at a defensive midfield that will contain Edu Leuven, Jabulu Blom, Chris Durkin, Miggy Perez, and a growing Miggy Perez. So there's a lot to love about that ability, knowing how important it is at any given time to the style of play St. Louis has.
Yeah, what it does, it's almost the first domino, because what it does is it allows you on any given match day to, assuming Blom's there, right? Because he's going to be gone with international duty, presumably, and it's, at some point, potentially.
You hope.
Yeah, you hope. The South African coach is not necessarily the biggest Blom fan in the world, but it is what it is. So that right there means, hey, he's not around, and you can always You can always hope that somebody's not going to get hurt all year, but as we saw last year with the injuries do happen. And sometimes extended injuries happen, and so having the ability, let's say everybody's healthy, to say, okay, you can play them together. You can play Durkin and Blom at the same time. You can play, if you're going to play a diamond, which I know a lot of people are not super wild about, but you can play one and rest the other one. You can, if you're going to rest one and still play two, CDMs, you can slide Lubin back there, or, and what that does is it allows, like you said, guys like Vasilev to maybe go back to where they should be playing, or that natural position that they have, and where they're not being pressed into duty. Because when you think about it, this team last year had a center back playing left back in Kyle Hebert, had a attacking midfielder type of Vasilev, which I think he's pretty versatile, but he got pushed into playing a role where he's not really used to playing it. And at the end of our season, our starting right back is a midfielder, which is Akil Watts. And so, Watts to me is more of a midfield type. And so he got pressed into duty as a right back. And so, yes, I think that this is the first domino that says, okay, now we have a 2 deep spot for CDM at the 6, where we can plug in one of those guys or both of those guys, depending on who we're playing. And it allows other moves to get made or other people to return to position, because, it snowballs. Because now when you think about things like, okay, is AZ Jackson going to be here all year? There's all these rumors about potentially him, being sought after by European teams. Okay, well, you better have somebody ready to go, and if you have Vasilev playing, backing up center defensive midfield all year, he's not ready to kind of step into those shoes. Now who's doing it, right? So
Right.
I think this was the perfect kind of opener, and the perfect, first move to make as far as acquiring somebody this season, because it fit the one thing that they didn't have any answers for, which was, what do we do when Blom is gone? And they were always scrambling all season long. And this is perfect. And he's going to provide that stability at the 6. He also has probably a little more offensive capability than Blom does, even though you're not going to ask him to do that. But it's always nice to have a guy who can threaten the goal. And the other thing too that I don't think, and maybe you can touch on this, and maybe I'm mistaken, that I don't ever hear anybody talk about with Blom, is he is a guy who plays a very physical style of soccer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very physical guy who's also 5'8", 150 pounds. That wears on you no matter who you are. If you're a small guy playing physical, I think with some of the other guys that season, with, you also talk about the travel and just all the stuff that goes into it. His first year in the league, and it's a much more physical league than a lot of guys who are coming from overseas expect it to be. But he's a smaller guy who plays a very physical style, and that wears on you. And so to have the ability to say, okay, you know what, let him sit this one, plug Durkin in there or play him together. And that way you're not totally relying on him at the 6. I think it's great.
Jabula Blom is an interesting kind of case study in our young club's history of bringing on a player late in the preseason, kind of the only player who we had to do this. And he was acclimating to such a different environment, a different climate in a lot of different ways, culturally, the weather related. But he said multiple times throughout the year how difficult it was, the transition to play in America, in St. Louis, away from friends and family. But also at the end of the season, he was alluding to things that are as simple as nutrition and trying to find things that work for him here, and adapt his body to eating and drinking right, and to everything that goes into preparing yourself physically. And you could tell that in similar ways that we talked about Berkey and Parker just being burned out, you could tell that the season wore on him significantly. So having him learn from those experiences, coming back for a second season, in addition to the depth that Durkin and the kind of relief that Durkin can provide him, that's going to be huge for this club. And Durkin is going to offer, I mean, he's 6 foot, 165 pounds, so he's a taller guy. He's going to offer a different look, a different feel at the defensive mid. He does have impressive passing ranges. He is an impressive defender. He can also play a little bit on the right side. So if you need him to move over a little bit, maybe he can offer some flexibility. Like he does a lot. He did a lot for DC United to progress the ball up the field. And when you look at some of his stats and try to figure out what kind of a player he is, he's as compared to midfield. If you look at FBref, he's in the 88th percentile of touches in the attacking penalty area. He's in the 91st percentile in progressive passes. So this is a guy who's good at moving the ball up the field. He's quick. He's able to progress himself high up the field. And so you wonder how that's going to work for St. Louis if he's alongside Blom. This might provide a little bit of extra flexibility to what Leuven would try to do sometimes alongside of him in that box to box role. But the level of freedom that we're going to give Durkin is going to be really interesting to me. And it's going to come off of how we play him alongside Blom or in place of Blom, and how that cascade affects the rest of the team. And we'll talk about it on the depth chart, but I'm just really interested to see if they're intending to complement each other, or if they're more intending to be that 1A, 1B options. That's the thing that I think I'm most interested in when it comes to Durkin.
Yeah. From everything I've seen of him and read about him and watch clips, and all of a sudden he turns into a guy you're super interested in because now he's on City. The ability, his distribution and his passing is what kind of excites me, because for everything that Blom does well, and he does a lot of stuff well, I think the pace on his passes a lot of times is something that he could probably improve on. I don't know if it was the style that he was used to playing, but it just seemed like a lot of times we were asking him to distribute more than we probably should have, because we have guys who can. I think, to me, Leuven is the kind of your guy who he's the guy who needs to be distributing the ball. He reads the field so well, and he makes passing. He makes beautiful passes, but he is your quarterback. And AZ is almost, to use another sport equivalent, AZ Jackson is more of your point guard on a fast break. He's your transition guy to get the ball and move it quickly upfield because he has all that speed and quickness. Whereas Blom, I think sometimes, we need him to do a specific job in a specific role. And if we don't ask too much of him, like, we don't need him to become this great distributor of the ball, because I don't know if that's in his game right now. But with Durkin, I think he's maybe a hybrid of, okay, he can defend, like Blom does, and be that central defensive midfielder that we need, but also have a little bit of that Leuven distribution ability of, helping the transition game, getting the ball to guys like AZ, getting the ball to, guys like Acelio on the wing, and helping, break through that kind of initial wall of defense that a lot of teams started to fall into against us, especially later on in the season. So I think it's nothing but positive for the Durkin move.
We're starting to get into it, so let's dive full on into where this all leads us. We have one trade before we get to the depth chart, so let's quickly cover that. There was another trade that we made to acquire an international roster slot in exchange for $175,000 in GAM with Nashville SC, who just was wheeling and dealing on international slots. They sent 5 international slots away for a total of $825,000 to, I think it was New England Revolution, St. Louis City, and there was another club in there that I don't have pulled up, but they started sending international slots away like crazy. NYCFC was the other one.
Yeah, that's right.
Or NYCFC, Charlotte, and St. Louis City.
Sure.
And it was a modest haul. We didn't overpay. I think we were the only club that acquired 1. The other 2 teams acquired 2. We paid a little bit of a premium for just being 1, but only like $25,000 extra. And this, to me, it doesn't do much right now, but this is Lutz's MO. This is Lutz acquiring a slot that he doesn't actively need right at this moment, but he either has an immediate eye on, or he's keeping it in his back pocket for flexibility. I think back, Chris, to last summer when we had a few extra international roster slots. And on the very last day, I think it was, of the transfer window, we sent that slot to Atlanta for 100,000 something in 2024 GAM. So he kept that slot until he knew he didn't need it and couldn't use it. It was just an extra slot just in case he could land that deal and bring in somebody to help fill it. Right now, St. Louis has 8 international players, assuming nobody has a green card, which we're going to find out beginning of January. I promise, as soon as we have access to the club, we're going to find out. But right now, we have 8 international players to take up those 8 slots that we have. And we have 2 players on loan. Pedro and Jensen are on loan until the end of June. If we want to recall them, we need to have an open international slot for them to occupy. This at least gives us 1 open international roster slot going forward. Whether we use it on a player in the transfer window in January, or we keep it open until the summer for one of those 2 players, That's where I view this international roster slot. It's nothing sexy right now, but it provides an additional flexibility that we need.
It's much better to have it and not need it than the other way around. Like, to find yourself in a position where you desperately need to get one of those and then you don't have it available for a particular player that you might have an immediate need for, or have a deal in place. If we it's much better to have that flexibility, exactly like you said. And whether they're looking at somebody right now that could potentially fill a spot that they need that international spot for, or they don't have anybody in mind. Although Lutz was in Aberdeen yesterday, basically hanging out with Derek Ray. Who knows what he was? Who knows who he was looking at? But
you never know.
Yeah, you never know. And that's what I said initially. Is I'm very interested to see if this is something that's leading to something, or if this is more of stick it in the back pocket, and if we need it, then it's available. Whether it's now, whether it's in the summer transfer window. Again, like you said, we're waiting kind of patiently to see, okay, what's coming, and you don't know, because this isn't, basketball, baseball, hockey, where everybody that could potentially be in the league. You watch them in other sports, in college or whatever. They could pull somebody out of someplace you've never heard of, and all of a sudden he's playing left wing for you, or i.e. Nökkvi Thorson. How many people knew who Nökkvi Thorson was before they expressed interest in him, or the rumor was that they were interested in looking at him? So yeah, I think it's much, there was no tribute video for the 175,000 in GAM. I mean, so best of luck to him in Nashville.
We wish him well in his future endeavors.
We do. Yeah, maybe he'll get more use in Nashville. So yeah, I definitely think it's worth having that spot available. Whether they use it or not, who knows?
This takes us straight through to the depth chart conversation, because that flexibility that we have, talking about how Durkin's going to fit in with Blom, we basically have the same number that we started with after those end of season roster moves. We're still at 25 rostered players with 2 additional players on loan. So where we sit right now, as we record this on December 14th, St. Louis City has the ability to sign 5 more players in this offseason. They have 2 on loan that will come up at the end of June, so they'll need to figure out something to do with them if they fill all 5. Personally, I don't think they're going to fill all 5. I think they're going to have flexibility, again, going forward, whether it's signing a homegrown midseason or bringing back 1 or 2 players off loan. I don't see us filling all of these 5 open roster slots. I think that we do have areas of need. And so when I look at my wish list going forward to this offseason, whether it's in the reentry draft stage 2, whether it's through a trade, whether it's through a transfer from outside of MLS, I still want to see us bolster our back line. I would prefer it to target the left back position, and I would like to see Kyle Hiebert see a little more time at center back. My wish list starts at left back, and I think right back is another area that I think we could bolster. But I'm overall happy right now with where we sit in our midfield and where we sit with our attacking midfielder and with our wings. Even I'm happy because I see, to borrow I keep doing this, borrowing a John Mozeliak term. Nökkvi Thorson is essentially like a new signing to me because of what Lutz had reinforced last year, that he was brought on to do exactly what the other internationals did in 22, which is get acclimated, learn the system, and then hit the ground running in 2024. Nökkvi Thorson is signed to a multi-year deal, so this is his start. This is his chance. And sending Jared Stroud out, I see Nökkvi Thorson as either a primary option in the attack and a 2 striker. He's going to push for a starting spot, or as our starting left mid. I think he's a completely viable option up there, along with a guy like Celio. And I would love to have a healthy Rasmus Alm back. Let me say that. I think just like Joachim Nielsen, we haven't seen a fully healthy Rasmus Alm in quite some time. And his return will be such a boost on that right side. It'll open up our center midfield for AZ Jackson, Indiana Vasilev, Tomas Ostrak, all of whom can also play those wide positions. There's tons of mixing and matching that can occur over there. You've already got 4 deep up front with Klaus, Gioacchini, Sam Adeniran, and Caden Glover. We talked about the central midfield earlier. We talked about center back and left back. Jake Nerwinski and Akil Watts as our right back combo. I do think there's an area of improvement there. Both of their contracts are coming up, so there could be a long-term option. So fullbacks and anything else that we might do for depth going into all these competitions that we have.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about the right back position, Nerwinski had certainly had his moments. He had that beautiful cross
Mm-hmm.
to Klaus in the I think it was a Minnesota game in the pouring down rain
Yeah,
for
where
that
he
header.
pointed, where he
Yeah, where
pointed.
he guided Klaus like go head this
That
ball
was
in. I'm about to hit. It was awesome.
perfect.
Yeah. And so Nerwinski certainly had his moments, both good and bad. And I think Watts as well had, he is obviously more of an offensive player or offensive minded player, who's been kind of forced into playing that right back role. To me, if they're going to get somebody at the right back, it better be to me at least, it should be somebody who's better than either of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's not, then you don't need that depth. If you already got those two guys and they're your 1 and 2, whatever combination you want to play them in, unless you're going out to get a starter to say, okay, we're going to have here's our new right back with Nerwinski as the 1B or the 2, and then Watts shifting back more into a midfield role, who also can play right back when if necessary. I think that to me that I wouldn't go get another guy who's like either one of them, because now what you don't want to have is 3 or 4 guys who are all basically the same or at the same level. And then because then you're kind of flipping a coin, like, okay, who's hot at the time, who needs minutes, But to me, if you're going to get a right back, it needs to be a starting right back. And I almost looked at it the same way with a left back. If you're not happy with Hebert playing there, or Marcanic needs more time to develop or whatever, go get a starter. But do you really need to get just another depth piece at those positions? Maybe, but not necessarily going to be a high priority.
Yeah.
With the midfield, like you said, I've been on the Rasmus Alm bandwagon since game one. I think he was the missing piece down the stretch. I think his reads on our pressing style and his reads of when to press and when not to was so important and was very noticeable when he wasn't there. I think he's awesome at making the decision of, okay, I should press up and or not. And Klaus is another guy who does a really good job at that. And he often guides like, hey, let's press or let's not. I think Alm was always in sync with him with that. And when he was gone with his injury, I think it was very noticeable. And so having hopefully a full healthy season out of Alm, having Thorson, like you said, I think our attacking midfield depth is great. I'm interested to see if they can unlock Ostrak a little bit more this year.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't really know what he is. I think he got pushed into kind of being a late sub in a lot of games, coming on at the 75th minute or the 70th minute or the 80th minute. And it's really hard to kind of get as a player. I imagine it has to be very difficult to get in any kind of game rhythm at all when you're seeing 10 minutes a game or 15 minutes a game. And, are you being asked to defend a lead? Are you being asked to try and score, and press if you're behind? So I don't really know if we saw really what Ostrak is. I don't know if he's an Alm light or if he's, more of a defensive mind. I just don't know because we just didn't see that much of him to really kind of get a good read on it. Celio is the guy that I was a little skeptical of in the early part of the season because I wondered if his possession dribbling style fit with our overall team concept of moving the ball quickly up the field and getting direct approach and getting shots on goal and really kind of attacking. And a lot of times I felt, especially early on, he was more of a black hole where he would get the ball, everything would slow down because he would try to beat people off the dribble. And I think he did an awesome job of modifying his game just a little bit to do everything he does, which he does very well, but do it faster. And I think by the end of the season, he was a guy where I was like, man, he's going to get way more minutes next year because he was phenomenal down the stretch, and in the playoff games against KC, you could see how dangerous he was. And I think he just made a couple small adjustments to how quickly he does things and executes,
I think the amount of players that we're talking about here highlights one thing that I want to kind of have as a takeaway as we get ready for 2024. And we're going to talk about this a lot next year. And it's something that I noticed a lot when we had perceived rotated lineups in 2023. And that's a sentiment that we're punting, or we're sending out the B team, or we're not prioritizing this match over this other match. And if there's something that City fans are going to have to get used to in 2024, it's rotation. And it's a lot of it. It's mixing and matching lineups. It's seeing a not consistent 11 game in and game out because of A, so many competitions, but B, we saw what happened this year down the stretch. And to mitigate that, you have to keep guys fresh throughout the season. And that doesn't mean playing 33 of 34 games. That means playing 28 of 34 games. You know, you're going to have consistent times throughout the year where we're going to have different looks. And that doesn't mean any single thing about our desire to win a game, or you can make the arguments in cup competitions because they're win or go home in a lot of senses, but especially in MLS league play. And I think we're going to have an interesting conversation if and when we don't get off to near as hot a start as we did this season. But I do keep in mind what we talked about at the beginning, which is down the stretch is what matters. And next year's St. Louis, if there's one thing they have to really figure out, it's how to maintain and build into the playoffs as opposed to fizzling out or letting the hot start fade to an extent. And this depth is one of the answers to that. And so one of the points you made, I think, speaking to that, is the left back and center back conversation. I agree that if you're going to bring in a right back, you bring in a top tier right back, or you don't bring in a right back at all. Left back and center back, when I mentioned whatever move we make, because I do think we're going to make a move, right, in one of those two positions. The move we make is going to dictate what Kyle Hiebert does. And I see us doing one of two things. Either we sign a high level left back who is from day one known as the immediate starter, or we sign depth at center back. I don't see us signing any high level center back that will truly push Joachim Nielsen or Tim Parker. I think their jobs are as secure as anyone on the teams right now, similar to Berkey, Leuven, and Klaus. I see left back as entirely up for grabs. And if we find somebody and we fill that spot with a true attacking minded two-way player, fullback that can also probably play wing back, then I think it gives Kyle Hiebert some ability to go back to center back and rotate in with Joachim Nielsen, provide that depth. Because right now we only really have three center backs if you're sliding Kyle Hiebert out on the left side. Three center backs is not enough going into this set of competition. So Kyle Hiebert has that flexibility to go back and forth, but where his role is going to fall is going to depend on what signing we put into place between those two positions.
No, for sure. And all of this comes with the caveat of assuming they're going to play four in the back next year.
True.
Because there is no guarantee of that. They might roll out a three center back midfield or a three center back, formation at certain times, which would be very surprising if they don't sign anybody, because you're really stretching your depth there. But the other thing too, to keep in the back of your mind, and we touched on this a little earlier, and when I talked about towards the end of the season last year, Parker's not a younger guy. He's an older guy, and how many miles you're going to get out of his legs and still have him be the player he is and can be towards the end of the season. You need to make sure that he's getting his rest. I think, again, I think they wore him down last year. So yeah, I completely agree that, if they go out and get a center back, then, again, we may touch on him, we may not, they just let a center back go, in John Bell. And so,
and Lucas Bartlett.
Now, okay, you can say the Bartlett trade was kind of facilitated because you needed a center defensive midfielder more than you needed, a fourth center back or whatever you want to term him as. But with losing Bartlett and losing Bell, you wonder if they've got somebody they've identified that we can bring in one guy who can kind of fit and get minutes. That's going to kind of replace both those guys, because Bell didn't see hardly any minutes all last year. And Bartlett played more out of necessity than he did really pushing hey, I'm playing so well that you got to play me. There was a little bit of that. And, he had a nice run for a couple months where he was playing very well. But it was, he got that position more out of necessity, with Nielsen being gone.
The obvious answer, though, Chris, sorry to interrupt you. The obvious answer to center back is Michael Wenzel from City 2. Yeah. So if you want depth at center back and you want to give some flexibility to formations, looking at a possible three in the back with wing backs, or even Kyle Hiebert going back and forth, Michael Wenzel provides that depth at center back. So when you
Yeah.
look at the level of that Bell and Bartlett brought, I don't see much missing or losing steam compared to bringing up Michael Wenzel, who did so well with City 2 last year.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And the Mo Mosaseka probably speak more because he's a City 2 diehard who was almost at every single game. But Wenzel was great in the limited amount of games that I saw him play. Yes, he could be that guy. He could certainly be a guy where you could get him some minutes. He can play off of one of the other more experienced center backs and the veteran guys. Like you could see him paired with a Parker who's going to give him that MLS kind of background, experience, guidance. Tim's been in the league for a long time. Yes, you could certainly see that. And in that case, if they're comfortable with him and they're like, okay, Wenzel's going to be kind of the fourth guy at center back. And we haven't even brought up Yarrow, who I think is back, right?
He's back.
So he's another depth piece who, he played very well at times. So yeah, Wenzel could be the guy, and that would allow you to say, okay, maybe we're okay there, or maybe we need to add one extra piece, and go out and get a left back if that's the route they choose to go. And then, I agree with you in that, what Hebert's position is next year is going to be dictated by who they would bring in.
Honestly, for Wenzel, we know he's still signed with a contract with City 2.
Yeah.
I could easily see a scenario where he's signed to a short-term affiliate loan to come up to play in the US Open Cup or something like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, and that's the thing is you wonder, I'm assuming, and I haven't heard, but assuming they're doing Leagues Cup again, or have they announced it yet?
They haven't announced the schedule, but I think
assume they're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you figure, okay, we have Triple C, in February. We have US Open Cup. We have Leagues Cup, and so it's a lot of competitions. Are you going to see some of these guys, like we saw last year with Klein get loaned up, because we needed a body? Are you going to see a Caden? Will there be a Caden Glover sighting, at some point during the season because of depth and rest? And, and that's the thing too, as you talked earlier, a couple minutes ago about, people will need to go into this season with the understanding that, hey, you're going to see a whole bunch of different lineups. This isn't baseball where you're going to roll out the same 9 every time,
right?
Or not 6 times out of 7. You're going to see people, move in and out of the lineup, and that's a necessity because they're playing so many games and the weather here is so hot. We're not in San Diego where it's going to be 70 degrees all the time. Those guys are going to have an advantage in 2025 just from a weather perspective. But it's going to be an interesting season to follow just on how he manages his personnel. Because you think about up top, right? We have, Nico, we have Sam, we have Klaus, we have Glover if he gets an opportunity to come up and play. What combination works there? Who's your energy guy off the bench? Like the role that Stroud was originally kind of doing before Alm got hurt.
That's right.
It's going to be fascinating and to see. And so I'm curious, like you said, if there is a big move to be made, which I don't know if they will do it, they still have a DP slot open, and is that a possibility to go out and get somebody that will be a starter, because to me, if you're going to make depth moves, that's fine. But there are weaknesses. They have addressed one already in getting Durkin. But if you can get a talent upgrade at a left back, or to me, even a right back or a center back, it wouldn't necessarily be a starter over Nielsen or Parker. But again, you have to always keep an eye on the future. And like you said, if Hebert's your guy going forward, once Parker's not here anymore, you always have to be looking for that next season down the road and to help yourself as much this year. But if you can find a guy that, and they have a lot of those guys who are in that 26, 27 range, who are probably not going to Europe at this point in their careers. Who are, you have younger guys like an AZ who might, and, people have even thrown out Sam's name potentially for that to go overseas. But to find guys who are in that 26, 27-year-old range who you can sign to a multi-year deal who are going to be here in the MLS. I think that for sure, if you have an upgrade at starter over left back, then you have to make that move. I think you do. So. And just to touch on, like, with all those games, you have a situation where And I think they tried to do this a little bit where you can give Klaus a game off and let him come in the last 15 if we need a goal.
Hmm.
You can get it's almost like when you have pitchers in baseball who they'll say, well, that was their rest day anyways, so they're gonna throw a little bit. They might throw an inning or two, or that was going to be their workout day. You can give guys time off and still have them make an impact in a particular match, right? You don't
Yeah,
have to start everybody all the time.
that's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big takeaways, and I think that's so keeping in mind all of this necessary depth and kind of where we're going from here. There's a handful of things I think we need to remember before training camp starts, and kind of as we look through the holiday season, look at what's coming up in the off season, and we've talked about what we think St. Louis City needs, but how can they acquire them? So there's not a whole lot of off season activities left. The re-entry draft stage 1 is over. St. Louis did not select a player. In fact, only 2 MLS teams made moves: Austin FC Seattle and Austin FC. They each selected a player. Seattle Sounders selecting John Bell as one of the 2 players in the re-entry stage 1. No other moves were made according to the announcement by the Seattle Sounders, so St. Louis stood pat. There's one more round of re-entry, and we've talked on our socials about what re-entry is. So if you're listening to this and you don't know, it's basically free agency light, and it's in draft form. You don't qualify for free agency. You've had at least 1 year of service in MLS, and you're at least 22 years old. But you're allowed to be selected in a 2-round draft by teams. You're not a true free agent. It's kind of like the Rule 5 draft, restricted free agency, whatever you want to call it. But there's one more round of that on December 21st, next Thursday. Other than that, it's the Super Draft on December 19th, Tuesday of next week. And St. Louis City I would not expect much from that. We've already traded away our first-round draft pick to Colorado for the Anthony Marcanic deal. Last year, we traded away our third-round pick. That's not valued by the club, at least not at this juncture in the game. It's our academy. It's developing from within, and it's using other mechanisms. So don't plan on too much there. But I do want to set the stage for what kind of roster flexibility St. Louis has. And you alluded to this a little bit ago, Chris, in that we signed a U22 player, so that's great. There are a handful of different roster classifications that are important to know in what St. Louis has available going into the rest of the offseason, with 5 open roster slots. Like I said, we have 2 designated players under contract, Klaus and Leuven. We have 1 open DP slot. We could fill that with a senior DP or a young DP, age 23 or younger. We have 2 open U22 slots at this point in time. And we have a decent amount of allocation money, if my estimates are correct, that we can spend. The unfortunate thing is, today, as we're recording this, there were no changes to the overall allocation pot. So the previously agreed upon increases in GAM, TAM, and salary budget charge, those all still apply. They're incremental increases according to the CBA. There's nothing that the league voted to add or do anything differently outside of the bounds of the CBA. So business as usual there. So we have a handful of flexible roster slots that the MLS mechanisms allow for us. We talked about the depth. Anything else you want to cover about what to look for this offseason?
Well, just first off, I know we touched on it a little bit. I'm happy for John Bell. You obviously don't, you don't want to lose players to potential rivals, or, the old adage, you don't trade in your division, things like that. I'm happy for John Bell because hopefully he's going somewhere where he can get minutes. I felt bad that he did not get a real opportunity here. Not that, he deserved it over anyone else. It's just, you want these guys to be able to be in a position where they can play and they get minutes. And so, that's a different outlook. There's a lot of people in St. Louis, as much as St. Louis has our, the rich soccer history that we have, and all the things that we always talk about with the history of the game. There are a lot of people who are new to soccer or new to MLS. And I think sometimes people don't really grasp the fact that these guys have a very limited window of making such an impact. They all want to go to Europe. That's no secret. They always want to play in the best 5 leagues in the world. And they have such a limited opportunity to do that, to show what they have wherever they are, and to be buried on a roster where you're just not getting minutes. For a guy who's on the Jamaican national team, by the way,
Mhm.
I'm glad he's going somewhere where he can get a chance to potentially play and and make and make an impact for himself for his own career. Same way with Kip Keller. Kip Keller got moved to Cincinnati. That's a local guy, and I know there was some rumblings about maybe we should try to sign him as a center back piece, whether it's for City 2 or not. I think you guys talked about that on one of the last podcasts.
Mhm.
Um, it's a situation where again, you're hoping the guy's going there to get minutes and not just get stashed on the roster somewhere.
Yeah.
As far as the offseason, again, like you touched on, the super draft's going to be a non-event for most City fans probably. The re-entry thing today was, I saw a few people asking, can we watch this
Yeah.
somewhere? And I'm like, really? I was like, that might not be really the most exciting viewing. And
That's how hardcore City fans are, though, right? They hear
I get it. I get
we're
it.
involved in something.
And
We
I
just
will
wanna
plead
watch
guilty to the
something.
fact that I did look up can you watch the re-entry draft?
It's in your search history. Hop
Yes,
to
it
it.
is. So that's going to be kind of a non, the super draft will be a non-event, and like you said, they don't seem to be putting all that much importance on it. I don't know if that's just because hey, we don't have a first rounder, so it is what it is. I don't know if our previous first rounder has impacted that attitude at all, which maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. You don't know, and because
Couldn't have helped.
yeah, I mean, and that's the big mystery is what happened with the Owen O'Malley situation. Did that, kind of, and again, you're also talking about a sporting director who's coming into a league. I don't think he's ever worked in a league that has a draft.
Yeah.
None of the Euro leagues do a draft.
Not
So
as an executive, yeah.
yeah, and so it's something that I don't know how much stock they put in it as opposed to like you said, the academy and youth development and that stuff. The other question I had for you, and you might know this because I certainly tried to look at it, is City doing the Coachella Valley thing because they're still listed as one of the teams participating, but they're not on the schedule. So
Yeah, there's been no official announcement, and that's the preseason tournament that was supposed to coincide now with CONCACAF Champions Cup. They're still listed their logo on the front, but they have no matches scheduled. And in fact, every other team who's involved there has their schedule laid out. The city is not on that. I would not be shocked to see an official announcement here soon, whether it's the crest removed on Coachella or we hear something at the beginning of January that they're no longer participating. I would not bank at all on City featuring there because of CONCACAF Champions Cup.
and while I got you, while I'm on, happy to be here and get to ask you questions on video. What was your reaction to getting Houston in the Triple C? Was it more of
Yeah.
I wish we would have gotten somebody new or interesting to play against, or was it hey, these are teams that we could potentially actually do something with and make waves and make an impact in this tournament? What was your initial reaction to the Houston?
Yep, that was the other big thing that happened, and I don't know what I was really expecting. I think I was just more in the happy to be there mindset, just watching it unfold, watching the draw live, and just knowing St. Louis City was in there. And I just didn't want to get slotted against Club America. That's legitimately the only thing I did not want. But I'm okay with Houston because it satisfied one of the criteria that I really was looking for, which is the best possible path to the next round. And that's what I see out of Houston because it's another MLS side. So both teams are going to be in preseason form.
Yep.
We've fared well against them and their style of play last year, having 1-1 and drew 1, 3-0 win and a 1-1 draw home and away. So there's that history. There's the knowing that we can handle this side. And we're both going to be in similar boats early in the season, trying to find our form in 2024. So it provides that easy runway. The thing I didn't want was another familiar foe in the second round. So
Columbus, yeah.
If we make it past Houston, we just go over to Ohio, and that's another boring opponent, so to speak. I mean, we don't get the sexiness of going international, even if it's Canada or something. The best we can hope for after that point is if we beat Houston, if we beat Columbus, we could either possibly go to Mexico and face Tigres or go to Canada and face Calvary. Like those,
yeah.
That's the extent of the hope. And that's kind of, if there's a damper to be put on the draw, it's that. But I don't even view it more as a damper. I just view it more as it's an international competition, regardless of which team we play. And the fact that MLS has so many teams in there inherently makes the odds of us playing another MLS side pretty strong. We knew this going into it. It's not like this should have been a huge surprise, but it's a team that we have so much familiarity with. And my only hope is that just means it provides an extra opportunity, given our past success against them, that we can move on. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was. It was, yeah, it'd have been cool to play a team we've never seen before, or give people an opportunity to go to a place they've never been to visit before. That would have been pretty neat.
Yeah.
It only serves to kind of to get the brand name out there of City SC and make us more recognized and well known around the world, assuming that you don't get smoked like like we did against America, which I don't know how much that enhanced our brand, but it was still nice to play a team at that level and say, hey, here's what one of the probably biggest clubs in North America is, if not the biggest, here's where they're at, here's the level that they play at, right? And you can see it in person. So yeah, it was something where I was a little slightly disappointed in that, because it would have been neat to see them play in Central America or somewhere else. But on the flip side, like you said, I was like, okay, well, that's a winnable first round matchup for us.
As winnable as anything we could have been matched.
Yeah, I mean, that's a winnable first round matchup. No disrespect to Houston, who had who was awesome in the second half of the season. But that's a winnable matchup. And then you go into the second round potentially if they get there, and you're looking at Columbus, which again, we traveled over there this year. It was what I called the reverse Cincinnati game, which was Cincinnati came here, they sat out a rain delay and looked like they had no interest in being there. Looked like they were just bored to death with the rain and the wait. And when we went to Columbus, it was almost the same situation.
Exactly.
They're playing at like 11:30 at night. They looked, not to say they were disinterested. They're professional soccer players and they're going to put forth a good effort, but you could tell it was just like, yeah, we'd have been more into this about 3 hours ago. We've been sitting playing cards for 3 hours and we want to do something else. Right. So yeah, I mean, you would see potentially Columbus, but there is that cachet of they are the defending MLS Cup champions,
Absolutely.
And so yeah. And so that's kind of where I was in the same boat. And I guess the other biggest thing that has happened obviously since this afternoon is the rule stuff, is all the announcements of the modifications to the rules. You touched on a little bit about the fact that they're not making any changes to like the number of DPs or the TAM-GAM stuff. Like that's all kind of stinks, stagnant. Too many people's chagrins who were begging them to go to 4 DPs. Which even if they gone to 4, I don't know if we would have used one, but we'll see.
Man, the stands for anti-MLS were out in full force late this afternoon. We can say that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure all of the pro-rel people, the USL fans,
USMN through Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's anything that they dislike, they are the vocal minority when it comes to that stuff. And I kind of want to get your thoughts really quickly. I know you don't want to do this all night, but I would like to hear kind of your thoughts. I'll give you mine really quickly, but
yeah.
I liked the on-field changes as far as the injury sub,
100%,
the equity of heading, like taking people off right away. I like that stuff. I think the hilarious one to me is having an MLS official get on the PA and announce a VAR, because Apple better be ready for the mute buttons, because all they're doing is essentially going to enhance the ref you suck people. Because if you're in an environment where the rule goes against you, because you see it in hockey, they and now they have it in baseball as well, where the guy comes on and the umpire would say, after review, he was safe or he was out or whatever. It's going to be real interesting in MLS.
There's going to be a learning curve with those refs and turning on and off their mics, and yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yes, I think it's going to lead to some unintended hilarity, in both good and bad ways. But what did you think about the other changes that they made on as far as the on-field stuff goes?
Yeah, the competition stuff. I'm a fan of, I think, just about every single one of them. The off field treatment rule, which was implemented in Next Pro last year in 22, I thought that was a fantastic rule. It's basically the anti diving rule, where it
Yep.
says if a player with a suspected injury remains on the ground for more than 15 seconds, the ref stops play, medical crew comes on, and the player moves to the sideline for a minimum of 2 minutes to be further assessed. This is going to make it to where players, they can't stay down, they can't keep diving and feigning injury because their team's going to be without them for multiple minutes. I love that rule. Huge fan of it. And it was implemented fairly well in Next Pro. I think it was consistent in its application. And I really enjoyed seeing the pace of play, and it kind of cut down on all that lollygagging. The time substitution rule, so it says maximizing the effective match time. Failure to exit from any point of the field within 10 seconds causes the incoming player to wait for a 60-second holding period. I like that. Again, a pace of play type of thing. I think it gets things moving fairly quickly. The stat that they threw out was interesting, and I guess I'll take it face value. It said 99.7% of the more than 3,200 substitutions were completed in 10 seconds or less. I will take their word for that one.
Yeah. First off, that's somebody's job to count the number of substitutions.
Yeah.
So good luck to that person. The only one on that part, and not to interrupt you, sorry, but the only one on the time substitution is I hope that they have common sense with it, right? Don't make it a hard 10 seconds that has no exceptions, right? Because if you've got some guy playing his last home game and he's retiring and he's waving to the crowd, don't come running over and say, well, you're on your sub took more than 10 seconds. Like, just have some common sense about it, and hopefully they make sure that the referees understand that they have to have situational awareness. The off-field treatment rule that you touched on first, the immediate feedback from not Americans and not MLS fans, but all over the rest of the world was like, finally somebody's doing this. Finally, the Americans are putting in a good rule.
Yeah.
And this is something that if it works here, maybe it'll go elsewhere, because I saw so many people from overseas in Europe and England and different places saying, yes, finally somebody's actually going to do this.
Yeah.
To say, hey, if you want to go down, if you're hurt, fine, but you gotta, if you're hurt, then you need to sit, for 2 minutes. And it's exactly what you described it as, which is the anti-diving rule. And I think it's awesome. But as far as the time substitution thing, I just ask that they have a little common sense with it. That's all.
Some grace for those monumental moments. I agree.
Exactly. Correct. Yes.
The other ones I'm a fan of, the in-stadium VAR announcements. I think VAR, more in-stadium VAR, more awareness for fans of what's going on. It's only could be good. And yeah, you're probably right. There are going to be some kinks they have to work out to it, but I would take hilarity and transparency over silence and frustration any day.
Yes.
So I'm good with, I love they're doing that. The stoppage time clock. I was joking with some friends earlier that, fans asked for flexibility with the roster, more ability to sign players, flexible use of money. And instead we got a clock that can count past 90 in stadiums. So
what it does is remove my feeling like I got to wear a watch to every match.
Yes, you don't have to break out the phone and turn on your stopwatch.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, and I trust me, in where we sit, where my season tickets are. As soon as 90 hits, I see everybody going like this or pulling out their phones and hitting start.
It's the thing that everybody's always made fun of soccer for, because you're in a stadium with somebody who's never been to a game, who's never seen the sport, and all of a sudden the clock stops at 90. And they're like, why are they still playing? Oh, it's in stoppage time. Well, what's stoppage time? Oh, well, you know how the play stops during the flow, but the clock doesn't stop? Well, this is making up for that time. Okay, well, how many minutes is it? Well, they popped up the minute down there too. Well, how do we know when 2 minutes comes? Oh, well, you'll just hear the whistle, and it'll be about 2 minutes when the referee says. You're just asking people to take leaps of faith when none of that's necessary. So it just adds to the transparency. It's just a common sense theme that they're finally adding in, and it's just one of those things that makes sense. You wonder why it took so long.
Yeah, well, the only impact I think it's going to have is everybody who's watched soccer for any period of time knows that if you are coming down to the end of stoppage time and it hits, let's say there's 5 minutes and you're at 95 minutes
Mhm.
and you're driving towards the goal, he's going to let the play go through. He's going to, most officials are just naturally going to say, let this sequence continue
Yeah.
until the ball gets cleared or they score a goal. Like they're not, they are not just going to say, oh, well, it's 95 minutes. We're done. Like, and
No,
so
but I think
it's going to expose that a little bit more, I think.
that'll be more transparent, but from a player and a coach and a staff perspective, they keep those kinds of times. Like the staff knows exactly when 95 minutes is coming up, when
Oh
you've
yeah.
got 5 minutes of stoppage. So like they're like it's just becoming more transparent to where the fans can now see that exact thing in stadium. And on TV, it's been like that. Like we
Yeah.
see, oh, it's 5 minutes. They're letting them finish up this drive type of a thing.
Yeah.
It just makes it to where the people in the stadium now get the same benefit that the staff has with their watches, that the people watching on TV have with their graphics. Like I think it just makes sense for the fan experience in the stadium.
Yeah. I'm waiting for, and you'll be there just like I will. I'm waiting for the first home game where we're leading and there's 3 minutes of stoppage time and 93 hits and the whistle doesn't blow. And then you hear all these people across the stadium going, well, wait a minute, start
Yeah.
pointing at the clock and, like, why is this not done yet? Why is this
Yeah.
not over? And so that's the only thing I could think it could lead to a little bit.
Yeah,
But
it'll
yeah,
change.
I'm fine with it. Yeah.
It'll change that dynamic for the fans have a little bit,
Yeah.
and I think it'll be fun to experience. But that was basically it. That was basically it as far as like the meaningful things, because there weren't on first glance a lot of meaningful things. But I do want to call out a few of what they actually did as far as roster and budget guideline updates. It
Mhm.
wasn't anything like we thought. It wasn't adding in a new bucket of TAM. It wasn't adding a fourth DP. Nothing meaningful from those perspectives. They reduced the discovery slot, which is basically the list of players that don't play in MLS, but you have on your list that says it's your dibs list, saying
Yeah.
if Cristiano Ronaldo were to come to MLS, then if whatever team has him on their list, they have the first right to be able to sign him.
It's a right of first refusal list.
Josh Sargent is on St. Louis's. We know that for sure because we were able to put him on our list when they got rid of the allocation order that we were number 1 on. So that's the kind of list it is, where if Sargent comes to MLS, we have the first right of first refusal for him. So they reduced that from 7 to 5. That's all. San Diego FC, when they start, they will be the only club that can maintain a 7 discovery list slot list. And that's it. General allocation money for designated player transfers. This is just adding in the fact that clubs can now elect to receive a portion of transfer fees as GAM. They can convert real money into fake money. That's all that is.
Yep.
There's one thing though that I think is interesting at second read for me, and it's the residency deadline. So we talked earlier, Chris, about the international roster slots, the international players, the green card scenario. Let me read this verbatim, and you tell me what your thoughts on it are. For a player to be considered a domestic player in the applicable season, residency must be established, or the player has to have appeared for an immigrant visa interview by the opening of the secondary transfer window. I need to talk to our friend Mario because he's the immigration expert on this. To me, that sounds awfully easy to do in order to be considered a domestic player. Residency must be established, or the player must have appeared for an immigrant visa interview by July 1st.
Yeah. How difficult is it to get an interview? That's the first thing I saw. Is it something where you need to go through a whole process, get to an approval point, and then they interview you? You're like, because if that's not the case, if a visa interview is something that is fairly easy to get, then that seems fairly easy to manipulate.
Yeah.
And also, what does this mean for teams that, let's say, you have 8 international slots, you have 8 international players, and then you get one guy who's like, oh, I got my interview. Does he get dropped? Now, did you just magically free up an international spot? Because
you sure did. That's the way I read it.
So, yeah, I don't know. You're going to have some probably wily sporting directors / GMs, whatever you want to call yourself, that are going to look at that and go, is there a way I can manipulate that? Because all of those guys do. The smart ones always find the loopholes. And so that's something that when I saw that too, I was like, wait a minute. That leaves the potential for, has to have appeared for an interview. So they already had it.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know, as someone who was born in the States, I don't know what the process is to get a visa, and
Right.
I don't know how difficult that is. And so, for any of your listeners who are out there who are not native United from the States, who did go through that process, shoot
Let us
Matt a
know.
line, let him know, hit him up on X, let him know, like, hey, here's what it involves, because I'm sure, speaking for you as well, we don't know. I don't know how difficult that is.
We'll find out. We'll find out here pretty soon, I think, whether it's from friends online telling us or whether the club has been able to convert one or more of our 8 into domestic players. So
Yeah, I
that'll
mean,
be interesting.
you always hear, Celio is a possibility for that because he went to college here.
Saleo has a green card.
Yeah, he's green card. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so he's good. But
yeah, he's good.
guys that have been here since early 22, like Berkey, Klaus, Leuven,
Yeah, that's right.
Ostrach, like all those guys. Those are the ones that I'm really keen on knowing how, especially because this it appeared for an immigrant visa interview. The club had to have been pushing, especially for guys like Berkey, Leuven, Ostrach, who are here till 26 or so, 25, 26.
Yeah,
Like that process had to have been started. So there's a potential opportunity there. I will be incredibly intrigued the first time they release the list that includes designations for international players. That's for sure.
yeah. And I don't. Do you know what kind of time frame when they typically do that, or?
With
Um,
their based on previous players, all I have to go off of is when some players entered the league and when they had their green card, and that was
mhm.
anywhere from 1 to 2 years. So we're approaching the time where that should be happening for some of these players that we signed during the City 2 year.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, we've talked about the roster tonight. We talked about, what potential moves they might still make and what's out there. The other thing that, that you have to remember as well, and to keep in the back of your mind, and this is going to be a conversation for you and Stu and Santi way down the road, is they also have to be thinking about, hey, at this, about a year from now, there's going to be an expansion draft, and what's involved in that process. Because, I'm sure that teams, when City was getting ready to start, or when Charlotte was getting ready to start, or Austin, they got to be thinking ahead to, okay, who are we going to make available for that,
Yep.
and that process. And so, that's another thing to take into account, is that, even though Don Garber said, hey, we're going to freeze it after they come in, we'll see how long that lasts. Because I still think they're going to go at least 2 more. I
Oh,
would like to see him go.
after the World Cup.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the other thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind is, well, there's an expansion draft basically this time next year. You were at the one last year,
Mhm.
which I think was right around this time, and
Yep.
so somewhere in that range. So that's another thing that they have to kind of keep in the back of their minds as well, is you still have to expose players to the expansion draft. So yeah, I mean, the roster and budget guideline updates that they released, like you said, the discovery slot reduction, okay, the GAM thing, TAM, I think what everybody was looking for is, are they going to, really the DP thing was, I think, the biggest. Are they going to do that? And they didn't. Does it shock me that they didn't? No. Would I like to see them do it? Yes, because I think it would expand probably the level of play, or level of players that are going to come into the league, but not
Yeah.
necessarily the level of play.
There was also the hope that they would decouple U22s from DPs, because
Yeah.
as it is now, if a club has 3 senior DPs, they only have 1 U22 slot. In order
Yeah.
to unlock all 3 U22 slots, they have to have at least a young DP, an open third slot, or a max TAM player. And St. Louis qualifies for that, obviously, but there was hope that they would decouple it. Our friend Joseph Lowry, Joe Lowry, from Backheeled Total Soccer
Mhm.
Show, he said it best to me, where he just simply said, no U22 stuff, no cap increase, no TAM changes, no simplification, no meaningful change. Now is the time to get more quality players in MLS to capitalize on Messi. At this rate, Messi will be gone in 2025 and nothing will have changed. Brutal.
Yeah. They've made such a push, and the other reason too is, I'm a little surprised that they didn't go, and try to get another DP slot, is Apple, frankly.
Hmm.
Because they're tied, they're tied at the hip now with Apple, and
Yeah.
obviously Apple was pushing and was contributing to that, to Messi being here, and having another DP slot would open up. Now, again, the thing I always kind of think about when you talk about that is just having an extra DP slot doesn't mean that an owner is going to, or any franchise is going to go out and spend the money for a guy to bring him here, or nor would a guy necessarily want to go to a certain place, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing when you start talking about some of these higher end guys coming over here. No offense to St. Louis, Minnesota, Kansas City / Kansas, Houston, some of these cities. Do these guys want to play in those places, or do they want to play in LA and Miami and, do they want, New York? Like, that's the thing is yes, you could have extra DP slots, but does that mean, that you're necessarily in a position where you're going to be able to entice a very high end guy like a Messi or a Suarez or, one of those type guys who's potentially going to be here to play where you're at, and I don't know. I don't know. And so it didn't break my heart to see them not go to 4, but I was a little disappointed, but it wasn't the end of the world. So,
yeah. And St. Louis in particular, they didn't utilize all their slots last year. And I've seen that comment a few times that what does it matter, especially for us, if we're not even able to leverage all the existing slots that they have? Why do we care about them adding more slots? And my answer to that is simply, it was our first year. This was our initial roster build. Yeah. I don't want them to fill up every single slot just for the sake of filling the slots. I want them to be meaningful and intentional in how they fill out this roster. I think they were successful in that first year. They have some open slots to work with. They just filled a U22, so we're already seeing progress compared to where we ended the year. So give some grace in the roster build, because it's a continual progression that is supposed to build something sustainable. It's not load up everything with the slots you have now. And I think that in and of itself would have benefited St. Louis had they done something like decoupling U22s from DPs, adding another DP. Yeah. We would have been able to take advantage of it at some point in a way that would have been meaningful to our own roster.
Yeah, because if you think about they did not, and they had, they're intelligent enough to know this market. These are not out of town owners. These are people from St. Louis,
right?
And they know this market, and they knew that it was going to be bonkers for tickets, and it was going to be, like they knew, and so you didn't need to go out and make a big splashy signing to get people in the seats. You didn't have to do that, which is nice for a season or two, but it's not sustainable, like you said. What they're trying to do and what we're all hopeful that they do is build a sustainable model of developing players and bringing guys in who are overlooked in other places and developing a team culture and a team style. And so, yes, bringing in a guy in the first season. And also, if you look at it from a business perspective, I don't think they had any expectation that they were going to have the success that they had. But they had to, they knew based on season ticket holders or sales that they were going to sell out every game. And I'm not trying to be a cynic about it, but, I think from a business perspective, they could have looked at it and said, well, we're going to be jam-packed in the first season anyways. It probably doesn't matter. And the success that they had was unexpected and awesome. And it was phenomenal and leads to all these great memories. But it doesn't really mean anything. Look at what FCC has done. They were horrible for 3 seasons, and then they were okay, and then they were the Shield winners, right? So, but they were starting from a different perspective. They were starting from an established club, basically. So, yeah, I think I don't think they had any interest in going that route of having to sign somebody because they didn't really need to, to make a splash, because they knew this was going to be an instant success anyways.
Right.
So,
Chris, I am about out of topics. You got
anything? Yeah, no, I'm sorry to keep you so long. I think we went double what you wanted to talk about, so I apologize for that. And,
it's my own fault, because and Santi will back me up on this. I always say, we can get this covered in 40 minutes. We're good to go, especially with just a few news topics. Talk about depth a little bit, and we'll wrap it up. But we haven't talked about anything in 2 weeks, so I think I should have expected that we wouldn't be able to contain ourselves.
And then also the stuff that happened today, contributed to that as well.
Of course. It always ends up timely, where things happen like the day of recording. I like it that way, but it does make for longer shows. But if you're sticking around with us still, thank you so much for staying with us. Chris Gebhardt from STL Soccer News. Follow him, STL_soccer_news or STLsoccernews.com. Fantastic website. Thank you so much for joining me, coming on. I'm going to have you back definitely for sure.
That was awesome. Means the world to me that that you would invite me in, and it was I love talking soccer, obviously, and to have I've said it to you in person, but I'll say it again so everybody can hear it. You are to me what I think you're our connection to the team as a fan, because you have that kind of inside, where you're at press conferences, and you have relationships with people at the club. You're kind of the link between a lot of us as in the fan base and the actual club itself. And it's great that, that you are willing to, have these conversations and stream live, which a lot of podcasts don't do. They want to get their message out there, and that's it. And that's great. And that's fine. And I listen to as many of them as I can, but truly, I appreciate what you do for all the rest of us fans. So,
well, thank you. And thank you for listening. Thank you for interacting like you always do in the chat. Thanks to everybody who's listening, interacting. It's been a fantastic year. Flyover's been here since 2015, but really taken off in the past handful of years. And it's been an amazing 2023. I can't wait for 2024. But as this is probably our last show of 23, I just want to say Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. It's the last night of Hanukkah, I think, tonight as we're recording this. Happy Kwanzaa for those who celebrate any of these holidays upcoming. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. And we will see you in 2024.
See ya. Happy holidays.